I tampered with the evidence in open court, and I didn't do it as a trick or a tantrum or a power trip. I did it because I was a judge in a city that loved clean endings more than true ones. And that day, the only way to keep a man from being crushed beneath a story designed to satisfy headlines was to tilt the table long enough for the truth to crawl out. The defendant was Marcus Hale, a contractor painted as a vengeful loser after a councilman was shot in his kitchen. The state had a handgun in a plastic bag, a motive you could summarize in a line, and a detective who glowed with institutional credibility. The gallery had donors and developers sitting with folded hands and calm eyes that said they already knew the ending. That morning, an anonymous letter had appeared on my chamber's desk with a sentence that hummed like a vein in my ear all day. Follow the shell companies. The real killer is sitting in your gallery. When the bailiff placed Exhibit C, the handgun, on the evidence table, I saw a small tear in the seal. Chain of custody is the quiet law that keeps loud lies out, and a torn seal is a fracture jurors can understand. I leaned forward to examine the bag and adjusted it just enough for Hale's tired lawyer to notice. He did, he objected. The prosecutor flushed, and the jury learned that the linchpin was a hair more human than the state wanted them to believe. I left the gun in evidence. The law likes continuity. But I had cracked the story's glass. That night, a journalist named Claire Rousseau met me in a cafe and confirmed what the letter had hinted. The dead councilman's finances were a river feeding 3 companies owned on paper by a developer's family, and that developer, Marcel Duval, watched Hale's trial from the second row like a man checking on his investments. Once a judge decides truth matters more than the script, the furniture of the courtroom becomes a set you can't unsee. The prosecutor asked me to be steady for the city. The detective, Renard, recited "sealed" like a hymn while his thumb twitched. My clerk, Nadia, found her drawer ajar and juror addresses disturbed. Juror number 6, a man named Mercier, slipped a note under my bench that read, "They're watching all of us." Claire fed me filings and boards and names that sounded like ordinary river stones until you turned them over and saw the slime of kickbacks underneath. When the prosecutor's brakes failed and his sedan burned on the courthouse steps while a car with a dented bumper idled across the street and watched, I let the day proceed and permitted Councilwoman Elodie Bernard to say out loud, for the record, that everyone understood the donors routing cash through Elise Holdings were Duval by marriage. The detective insisted he'd never seen a connection, and then, under pressure, admitted he'd written "D. Proffer sealed" in his log and somehow decided the district attorney didn't need to know. Internal Affairs took the back row in suits without badges and waited for the moment. Duval visited my chambers with a cream envelope and the kind of offer that makes decent men consider cowardice. Declare a mistrial for juror intimidation, and the clerk lives, the juror drives home, and your career lands softly. He called my career highly inappropriate with a smile that never moved his eyes, and when he left I called Internal Affairs and then did the unforgivable thing that saved 12 lives. I copied the sealed proffer from a vault no one visits and put it in juror number 6's hands in a parking garage that smelled like winter. "This will never be evidence," I told him, "but it's the truth, and you deserve armor if they plan to hunt you." They started hunting before sunrise. Nadia's car caught fire in the lot. She lived because a neighbor woke early. A note on my windshield said, "Juror 6 might not." Internal Affairs pulled Duval's phone records without looping in the DA. We went to war at 9. I put Renard on the stand and asked the questions the state didn't want asked, and when his eyes slid toward Duval before he lied about why he buried the councilman's proffer, the room learned something about gravity. I called Duval under subpoena as a court's witness, a highly unusual move that still lives in the rule book if you read it with a flashlight, and asked him to spell his name and then explain why his phone pinged off a tower near the dead man's apartment at the precise time the murder likely happened. He gave me the kind of answer rich men give when the question shouldn't have been possible. Perhaps I was out walking in the village, he said, and I told him Paris is a city when it wants to be, and that the village wanted a different story. I told the jury their job was not to decide whether Duval killed a councilman. Their job was to decide whether the state had proved that Marcus Hale did. They went into the room and locked the door and sent a note that said 11-1, and the foreperson asked me for guidance, the word that breaks judges because it asks for leadership and threatens reversal in the same breath. I gave them a careful Allen charge about humility and the difference between mathematical certainty and moral hesitation, and told them to listen to the 1 if they were 11, and to the 11 if they were 1, and reminded them that fear is not a reason to vote guilty in a free city. They returned in 21 minutes with a verdict that did not explode so much as allow air back into the lungs of the room. Not guilty. The foreperson added, hands shaking but voice clear, a request that the court refer Marcel Duval and Detective Renard to appropriate authorities because some truths do not belong in the dark. Internal Affairs stood and said already done, and officers closed around a developer who had grown used to exits arranged in advance. I resigned the next morning with a letter that listed every sin I'd committed in the name of a verdict I could live with. I tampered with evidence. I leaked a sealed proffer to a juror. I met a journalist. I bullied a detective. I called Internal Affairs over the DA's head. I asked for no forgiveness because that's not what the city needed. It needed a record of what it cost to pry one man out from under a machine designed for finality. Some colleagues called me a disgrace, and others a hero, and both words slid off because the only title that mattered was the one Marcus Hale earned back when he walked out of a courthouse alive. Claire published the money map. Renard fell first. Duval made bail and learned how ugly a camera can be when it stops loving you. Nadia moved apartments. Juror number 6 mailed me a postcard with a pencil sketch of a locked door and 12 chairs and the words "it mattered," and I keep the offer Duval slid across my desk folded in a drawer as a reminder that power always frames mercy as a deal. Sometimes people in bars ask me, quietly and with the complicity strangers share when they want to believe in something, whether I would do it again. I think about the torn seal I rotated half an inch and the way a developer's eyes finally narrowed when he realized a judge was willing to be the kind of human the law pretends not to need. I think about the sound the gavel made when I overruled the objection to my own charge because fear was thick in the hall and how it echoed, not triumphant, not theatrical, just certain. I say yes, but sooner. If a city must choose between pretty endings and honest ones, it deserves judges who remember which side of the scale their oath was meant to weight. I tampered with the evidence in open court, and what I broke was not the law. It was the story that would have buried a man the city found convenient to blame.